Are you struggling to create an intentional headspace? Unable to connect deeper with yourself? Come, and together, let's address the elephant in the room. I'm your host, Sinead Roche, and this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. Hi, everyone. So today I want to talk about, I think, just two concepts really that I was just actually, before I started filming, I was just thinking about how kind of like fucked up it is that you kind of need to have a balance of them. And those two concepts are self-doubt and self-trust. And they're both equally important in your life. Because like there's a fine line between them, right? Like, because if you actually think about it, like if you don't have trust in yourself, then you're kind of doubting yourself. And if you're doubting yourself, then you don't have trust. But if you trust yourself, then you don't have much self-doubt. Anyways, they literally are yin and yang in that sense. Like they do go hand in hand, but they are equally important. And I think it's going to be really hard, I would say, to apply what I'm about to talk today, like into your general life. But this is more about like just reflecting on who you are as a person right now. Are you someone who needs to work on maybe having a bit more self-doubt? And I know I'll explain what that is, because I think when you think of doubt, like you think, oh, you shouldn't have it in general, but sometimes it's actually good to have it. You know, having self-doubt could include like having humility, knowing that sometimes you are not always in the right. And I'm saying that. And I tend to, and especially in arguments, want to be in the right. But sometimes it's good to know that that's not always the case. And we'll talk more about that. And the same thing, like sometimes you just have to ask yourself, like, okay, like, do I trust myself? And especially like if you're coming from, like you've made past mistakes, like I think it's really hard to rebuild that trust with yourself and to even understand what that is, because it's not just like having no self-trust doesn't just mean like you are searching for validation constantly. Like there's so much more that goes into it. So that's why I want to talk about those two concepts today. And let's start with self-doubt. Let me explain what healthy self-doubt looks like. When you have self-doubt, like, and you are doubting yourself, to a degree, it allows you to reflect, it allows you to still know that you kind of have to change in some sense and that you are not 100% perfect. And it allows us to challenge ourselves, challenge past values that we have had, or like also past actions, which I think is easier to challenge than past values because those stem from different places. It's not just us who are creating those in ourselves, but it also, like, in that sense, like you are just able to kind of like, ask yourself like, okay, like, but can we do better? Is there something else that perhaps like, we need to challenge, something that perhaps was also challenged by an external force where like maybe a value was challenged and you're like, oh, but I thought this. And now you're kind of doubting yourself in that sense. So sometimes that is good also to have self-doubt, because maybe that could turn you into, maybe even just challenging that value could turn you into a different person. Don't know if that's good or bad, but hopefully it's good. It just allows you to reflect, as I said before. Another thing that self-doubt kind of like allows you to do, it allows you to relate to others. Because honestly, like, we are trying to get to that place where we don't have many insecurities. And now that I think about it, I should definitely do an episode on insecurities. But at the same time, sometimes it's very humbling. Maybe humbling is the right word for it. But sometimes it's really nice to hear that other people, not that we're celebrating other people's problems, that they have problems, but it's just nice to know that people are human and that sometimes they don't have it all figured out. I think that's a big thing also, like what I'm trying to do here is like show you sometimes like where I am doubting myself, show you sometimes like where I have to question myself, because all these podcasts, usually in most cases they're done by people who are like these complete professionals, and hopefully one day I also become that. But for right now, and even when I get there, I still do hope like I can share the fact that like sometimes I am doubting myself too, so that it was easy for you to relate to me and I can then also relate to others. Then I've also mentioned already, like, it does allow you to kind of have humility in some sense, a certain degree of self-doubt, obviously. And yeah, it also, like, you'll see yourself having self-doubt sometimes in projects that you are passionate about. And at some point, like, it is the thing of, like, do it scared and stuff, because you might be doubting the fact that you don't have what it takes. Like, even here, like, I've told you guys so many times, like, sometimes I doubt myself, like, on this, but I just continue to do it anyways, because at this point it's become routine. And anything, if you know me, I love routines, or routines love me. We are twins, something, we are one. But I'm still doubting myself throughout it. And for me, that means that I care, that I am passionate about this. Because if I didn't doubt myself at all, like, I swear, like, at all, like, and I thought, like, it doesn't really matter that much, then that's not showing my care for it. So in some sense, sometimes, like, your self-doubt can also show, like, okay, what you're actually passionate about, or where you do have your priorities, like, set, or, just showing your care for things. Okay, so these are just, like, some healthy ways that self-doubt can allow us to reflect, show where our passions lie, kind of relate to others, develop empathy as well. But now there's also the unhealthy level of self-doubt. So what I just talked about, the healthy version of self-doubt, right? We should strive for this amount, like, too much of it, and yeah, we're gonna go down south. But just enough to kind of have us just on this continuous path of, like, okay, maybe there is something that I'm unsure about. Maybe my way isn't the best way, or maybe my way isn't the only way. And it kind of also just allows us to also be open and willing to listen to others. Like, and I think anyone who's listening to this podcast, even if you're just here to support me, I don't think you're necessarily someone who has, like, is completely arrogant, maybe has, like, too much self-trust, because otherwise you wouldn't be listening to this, right? You wouldn't be open to at least hearing me out. That doesn't mean you have to apply everything, but you're still open to it. So self-doubt in that sense also allows us to, as I said, be humble and know that we don't know everything. Yeah. But now let's look at the unhealthy version of self-doubt. And the reason why you could potentially suffer from this amount of self-doubt is because of traumatic events, perhaps especially when you were growing up as a child. Your caregivers didn't really, like, at that point, like, validate you to a degree and encourage you to trust yourself. Here in Germany, or at least this was taught to me, I don't know if this is correct, but I keep telling people this, but if it's not correct, yikes. But here in Germany, one thing, like, that's very noticeable is most of the playgrounds are made of wood. And the reason that they're made out of wood is, like, to teach kids, like, okay, like, you're gonna mess up, you're gonna make mistakes, but, like, get back up, like, be careful. It kind of teaches them to be careful and instill that kind of self-trust in themselves, where they have to realize, like, wood is dangerous. But obviously, like, you can still make smart decisions, And then, obviously on the playgrounds, like, you're kind of validating them and, like, you're encouraging them, like, okay, continue, like, go up the ladder or something like this. I don't have kids, so I wouldn't know. But just, like, in that small sense, if that didn't happen for you when you were a kid, and, like, even those things of when you're trying to show your parents something, like, hey, look, like, I did a cartwheel or something, like, and that was also not happening, like, sometimes, you're not gonna exactly trust yourself. Like, you might be doubting yourself constantly because no one has ever reassured you, right? And we're talking right now about, like, self-doubt, so, like, you doubting yourself just from yourself. But that also has to do a lot with, like, how we were externally raised, like, how the external impacts, how external, like, objects is not the right, but how external subjects have also impacted our self-esteem with that, and have also, like, because, like, when you're a kid, you don't really know what's good and what's not good. So if someone's not clearly guiding you sometimes or redirecting you, then you're gonna be a bit more unsure. Like, well, this is one case, right? There's another case which I'll also come to, but you're gonna be a bit more unsure of, like, what's going on, like, like, is this right or not? No one's telling me. I'm not really sure. I don't trust myself enough. And as you grow up, potentially that pattern can continue to develop, and you're just gonna have you're gonna have other problems, but definitely like more self-doubt, right? And that might also mean that sometimes you can't see your own good qualities, right? So you're constantly like, oh, I'm not good enough. Like that is a part of it, like doubting yourself constantly, where it's like, there's nothing good about you. Like having those thoughts, which could mean also lack of self-worth. You just don't feel like you have any value. Then, as I've said, because you didn't really get perhaps the validation, and that's not the only reason why you might have self-doubt, but like the validation from external subjects when you were growing up, perhaps now you constantly require validation, like constantly. And sometimes that allows, I've talked about this in like the why we need self-love episode, but that could also allow for certain people to come into your life and take advantage of that. This could also mean that you're critiquing yourself constantly and you are overly critical of yourself. Could be perhaps also tied to the fact that you are a perfectionist. So you're always doubting the fact like it's not going to come out perfect. And another thing that ties into having more self-doubt or like an unhealthy amount of self-doubt is sometimes like you also start to say like you can't do certain things. And there's this this concept called like the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is basically like kind of, what you are saying you're able to do, like you will fulfill that. But in the same sense, if you say you can't do something, you will fulfill that by continuously reminding yourself that like you don't have what it takes, So also this means increase like negative self-talk. And overall, this is going to lead to anxiety, could lead to depression, could lead to overall low self-esteem. So that's why I said like self-doubt, like you need a balance to it. You need a certain ratio to it, like, because too much, no. And that's why we'll talk about self-trust in a second. Let's talk about how we get out of like this unhealthy, like an unnecessary amount of self-doubt. So when it comes to especially the fact that like we require validation, like from others, sometimes let's try to like redirect the questions that we're asking other people to answer and redirect them to ourselves. So some examples of that include like, so what am I good at? And actually ask yourself that instead. Like, so what do I think that I'm good at? For me, I can say, oh shit, what can I say? The first thing that popped in my head, and let's go like this, like what's the first thing that popped into my head? Because if I think about it for too long, I'm going to say I'm not good at it, but I think I'm good at yapping. I think I'm really good at yapping. I actually took a BuzzFeed test the other day with a friend, and I'm a 100% professional yapper, so I think I'm good at yapping. And then another thing, like, another question to also ask yourself that you would have asked someone else is like, okay, what do I like about me? What makes me me? Certain things like this where you start to know yourself a bit more and start to learn like what are the characteristics that make you you, and why do you like those characteristics about yourself? Like actually ask yourself, not other people. Like you might still doubt the fact that like you're saying, like even just now, like you saw how it took me a bit of time to like come up with an answer. Like you might still doubt it, but still state it, let's start to grab onto things so that we're being very concrete. Like when we say like we like ourselves, what do I like about myself? And perhaps let's not tie it to something that we're able to do for people. Let's tie it to just who we are. I like the fact that I'm very strong and very sensitive at the same time, that could be something, for example. Now, on the opposite side of this, also like helping to get over this extreme and surplus amount of self-doubt could be like, yes, seeking connection from people and not self-isolating. When you isolate yourself and you're already in this entire mindset of like you're not good enough and you have negative self-talk as a pattern and a habit that you've already pre-established, sometimes being in your own head it's not going to help you. So get away, not from yourself, but get to other people who you want to be around, who make you feel happy who you are happy to be around, because that's also now you're taking yourself out of your head. And that's what I would also say, like going to do exercise, that's something that you enjoy. Take take yourself out of it, but don't go there to like punish yourself. Wouldn't recommend that, right? And then another thing, and this is something that I can really relate to. It's not like I relate to the other things as well, because I think I still do have a large amount of self-doubt. It's just kind of forgiving your past judgments and your past mistakes. Because that will lower, like when you make mistakes, right? And you reflect on them, sometimes you're like, okay, but why should I now still be in control of my life? Like, it can sometimes even get to the point where you're like, and I'll give you a specific example. Like, if you go through a bad heartbreak and you realize you picked the wrong person, sometimes I think especially women have this tendency now, like when I see it a lot, like on Instagram, where it's saying like, I have to okay. I have to I forgot the word I was going to say. I have to ask my friends for permission if it's okay to, continue ahead with this person. And as great as it is to have like that type of community around you who like are willing to listen and advise, sometimes it's also like, okay, but let's increase the self-trust. Let's decrease the self-doubt, the doubt that you feel like it's just like the constant pressure that you have, not pressure, but that just the thought that you have that like you're not going to be able to make the choice correctly, and understand that making mistakes is just part of life. And obviously you don't want to make such drastic mistakes anymore. And that's when, advice and being around people is also really helpful. But also like, don't let it get to the point, where you're just like, you're so scared of messing up that you're going to protect yourself and protect yourself in quotations by allowing others to make decisions for you. Right. And so those were just some tips to get over this surplus amount of self-doubt. And so now let's talk about healthy self-trust and what that looks like. So that's the other part to this beautiful 50-50 of what we want to have. And sometimes, depending on different situations, we're going to have more more self-doubt. Sorry, just jumbling my words today. We're going to have more self-doubt rather than self-trust. And in other cases, it might be equal, or we might have some more self-trust and less self-doubt. And obviously, like self-trust is very important and something that we should all strive to have. And we would hope that in most situations, we actually have trust in ourselves. Now, let's look at what that healthily means. So having self-trust, first of all, let's talk not what it means, but kind of why it's important, how this can help us. It will allow us to feel more in control of our circumstances through management and understanding of ourselves, and that leads us to be more confident. So let me explain what I mean by that. You obviously can't control a situation, right? But you can control you, and you can control how you react. Maybe not how you feel, but how you react in those situations. And sometimes it is about this thing of like managing yourself kind of, and being able to go through something and know that like, okay, but I'm still sticking to me, or I'm sticking to the right value, and I'm understanding like why I'm doing this. So just, I don't want to say trusting yourself, but yeah. And it's this thing of trusting yourself because you understand yourself and how you act. And because you understand yourself, you're more confident in yourself, because you're like, okay, but I know why I do not even why I do certain things, but just because like, I know who I am, like, and I like who I am. That's another thing that comes into self-love. That's another part. But like, I know who I am. I like how I am, and who I am. And so like, that's why I'm confident in me. That's why I'm confident with some of the decisions I make, even if not all other people are following along with those decisions. Now, self-trust also leads to better decision-making. If you understand you more, then you're also going to understand like what you value and prioritize more. Again, even in situations where you're the only one who's doing that. And then you're also going to understand like and have a greater sense of self. So a sense of self is kind of like how you're perceiving your characteristics that define you. So just, again, like it does fall in line to who are you, understanding you. Just said it in a different way this time. Sorry, guys. Sometimes my notes, I'm looking at them and the way I've written them, it's crazy. Um, yeah, and all in all, with self-trust, you're going to develop a better relationship with yourself. It's the same way with any other relationship. Like, the more you get to know another person, the more you get to understand them, and the more you see that you like what you're seeing also, the more you're going to start to trust them, and it's the same way with yourself. The more you start to understand yourself, the more you start to get to want to know yourself, to like yourself. Again, that's also tying self-esteem into it. The more you'll trust yourself, and you might also trust yourself more. Obviously, like if many of your behaviors have had like positive outcomes, but that might not be the case for everything. Like I mentioned, like with like making past mistakes. But even people who have high self-trust or like a healthy amount of self-trust, they still know like, okay, perhaps like let's reflect on it, let's understand why we did this, and let's not attach that necessarily to our sense of self. Like it could just be a moment, but it doesn't have to be a defining moment for them. So then still carrying on with their self-trust, and like I mentioned in the other one, when it comes to self-doubt, you perhaps have negative self-talk. With self-trust, you're more likely to have positive self-talk, which makes sense because they go hand in hand. All right. And the unhealthy amount of self-trust. Sorry, guys. My voice today too. The unhealthy amount of self-trust could possibly stem from the fact that, like I was mentioning in the prior, self-doubt, kind of how sometimes like you are not like guided when you're a kid, and so you're not corrected, and that could leave you to feeling unsure of yourself. But on the other hand, what if you were maybe also not guided and corrected when you were younger, and because of that, you've defined everything for yourself? So some of your morals, they may not be morally ethnic. No, not ethic. Oh my God, not ethnic. Ethical. There may not be ethical. Ethical, guys. Today I'm actually forgetting my words. But they may not be moral to the general public, but for you they are. And this has to do a lot with the fact that you've had to survive on your own, and also the fact that no one has corrected you. No one has told you like, okay, like it's not okay to do this. And that's sometimes why we do need a guiding hand, especially when we're growing up, we're developing our self-identity. And this has more to do with like developmental psychology as well. So if you have an interest in that, take the lead. Now, what does unhealthy self-trust look like? It looks like arrogance, not willing to listen to others. So literally the opposite. And also no longer willing to change. Like one thing I really don't like when I hear from people, like, and it really just turns me off, is like, I don't have to change anymore. Like, obviously there's fundamental things about me that I'm not going to change for anyone. But like some of your behaviors, some of your patterns are some are negative. Like have you seen that they're negative? Like they've hurt you in the past and you don't want to change? Nah, I can't be around that, unfortunately. But let's talk about how we can get over like a high amount of self-trust, which is not even self-trust, high amount of self-trust at that point. It's just arrogance. I don't think you can get over this with certain tips. And I also don't think anyone listening has okay, we all were arrogant to a certain point, but like, I don't think anyone is to that point where they don't want to change, because literally this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. This is about changing, like, even though it's uncomfortable, like what? But in these cases where like you meet people who are like this potentially, and it can be for different reasons, it doesn't have to be for the fact that like, as a kid, like no one showed them or no one guided them. There's other reasons. These were just that was just like a main one. I feel like what helps them get over that, or what helps them kind of just like knock them down a peg, is big incidences where it's like, oh shit. Like they actually have to take a moment, and it's like, it's kind of like made them reevaluate a lot. Like for me, I wouldn't say in general I'm someone who's arrogant, or someone who has like a high self-trust. But I will say, like, for example, with my parents, recently, like I had like a conversation with my dad, and it really did knock me down a peg, like in the way I was behaving. And yeah, I started to doubt myself, like, and to doubt also some of my thinking. But like, I'm glad that happened. I'm glad that we had that conversation, because now like I can I'm a bit more I'm a bit more I'm definitely more respectful now. And B, it's just made me understand, like, oh, I did not know everything, like, wow, let me take a step back. Like, not me thinking I was fully formed and like fully done, it's kind of also nice to have sometimes, like, when someone just shows you, like, hey, wait a minute, and especially obviously this one's in a kind and loving manner, but that's not always going to be the case. But it's those instances that you can't really force on another person to experience that will potentially change them. So yeah, like I said, today I just want to talk about those two concepts. It might not bring you much. Maybe you don't want to think about this. Maybe this is not something you want to be really conscious about. But I think it's very important, like, especially because you'll start to understand, like, as you're navigating different situations and throughout life, like, okay, what is really like guiding those decisions? Is it my self-trust in myself that's coupled by the fact that, like, I've also like doubted myself enough to allow others to give reason? Or is it completely like my self-doubt in myself? And that's why I might have been unsure and have done something that I don't actually agree with, right? I just think being aware of it, like, allows you to understand, okay, hey, perhaps I need to increase or decrease, crease one of the other ones. So this is about being mindful today, just about being understanding, like, okay, in what situations, and ask yourself, in what situations do you feel like you're doubting yourself more than in others? And just take a moment to reflect, do you trust yourself? Like, trust yourself enough, like, where you're also still able to let other people in. Because, we do want to focus on a high emphasis on self-trust, because self-doubt doesn't even sound pretty. It doesn't even sound nice, right? But overall, like, reflect on yourself. Do you trust yourself enough, but also still, like, allow other people to get to you and to share other information that you might not have seen, And that's also the beauty of self-doubt is that also allows you to kind of empathize more. So yeah, because you're willing to relate to others. So guys, thank you guys so much for listening today. I hope that this has brought some concepts, that has brought these two concepts to your mind. And so that you are more mindful throughout your entire life, or even just for right now as you remember it. Thank you guys so much for listening.